With more on the fallout from Donald Trump's racist tweets and attacks against freshman House Democrats of color. Joining me now, Nayyera Haq, former State Department senior advisor, Kurt Bardella, president and CEO at Endeavor Strategies, and Tim Wise, anti-racism educator and author of White Like Me. Tim, I'm going to go to you first. Here's Donald Trump doing what I call the full Charlottesville, where he at first did what he was told and sort of seemed to pretend to take back what he did, and then he said, nah, good people on both sides. Here he is.
President Trump, you were unhappy with the chant. However, the chant was just repeating.
No, you know what I'm unhappy with?
What you said in your tweet.
You know what I'm
unhappy
You know what I'm unhappy with? I'm unhappy with the fact that a congresswoman can hate our country. I'm unhappy with the fact that a congresswoman can say anti-Semitic things. That's what I'm unhappy with. Those people in North Carolina, that stadium was packed. It was a record crowd, and I could have filled it 10 times, as you know. Those are incredible people. Those are incredible patriots.
Tim, just from having interviewed you for the book, we talked about you as a very young man, you were practically a kid, worked against David Duke's attempt to get elected statewide in the state of Louisiana. Can you just talk a little bit about why that kind of a person? He got like 2/3 of the white vote at the time, even though people knew what he was and who he was, and that he was a KKK Grand Wizard former. How do people appeal on that basis of race when, as you've said, most people don't want to be seen as racist?
Right. Well, it's something that Brother Cadial said in the last segment, that in reality, this is the oldest play in the playbook, right? Manipulating white racial fears with talk of how those people are the reason you don't have a job, or those people are the reason your kid didn't get into college, or those people are the reason your taxes are too high. That stuff that is, Donald Trump didn't create that. He didn't invent that. David Duke certainly didn't either, but both played upon it. And I think what both Duke understood and what Donald Trump frighteningly understands is that, contrary to the belief of a lot of old-line Republicans who apparently still believe that the Republican base sits around reading Milton Friedman and Ayn Rand and Kevin Phillips, what Duke understood and what Trump understands is that the base increasingly isn't doing that. They're sitting around reading Reddit threads about Hillary Clinton's child sex dungeon and Facebook posts from their Uncle Cooter about how Sharia law is going to take over Rivertown. These are people who are not believers in small government or low taxes. It is increasingly a white identity cult. And unless the rest of us understand that, including Democratic candidates, and talk about this election as the existential threat that it is to pluralistic, multicultural democracy, we're going to lose. We're going to blow it, because they are motivated by that belief that the America they love is being lost. We had better take the election just as seriously, and it's not going to be done with a bunch of great policy papers and policy positions. It's going to be done the way it was done in Louisiana, making people understand that David Duke was a threat to the America that we care about. Donald Trump is also that threat.
Well, Kurt, to that very point, Donald Trump took all the policy stuff off the table, right? Democrats who completely oppose all of these for women's ideas on policy, that is off the table. Donald Trump has said this is about what they look at them. It is about look at them. They are black and brown. That's what this is about. He's made that very clear. But, the Republican Party, and you were in it, or at least advising, and you were a Republican.
Right.
In the 2016 election, it seemed that Steve Bannon understood that very well. That essentially tweaking the idea of racial identity and fears of a brown takeover of America, that was much more powerful than the small government conservative stuff that really just helps rich people anyway. And he understood that. You now have people like Stephen Miller, whose ideas are so extreme. They're so extreme that he essentially wants to cut all immigration. Anybody brown can't get in, throw people out. Like, that's what this party is now. The Republican Party has been consumed by it. So I wonder if within the Republican Party, if you still talk with former friends from the Republican Party, do they understand that they've been consumed by what Tim has called a white sort of identity politics cult, or identity cult?
Joy, this is what's so frustrating to me, is the people that I talk to who are still Republicans, who are working in top levels in the Republican Party and even in this administration, privately bemoan what's happening right now. They shake their head. They're disgusted by it. They also think it's a losing political strategy on top of it. And yet no one's willing to do anything publicly. That's why it was so infuriating the other week when Paul Ryan in those book excerpts talked about what he really thought about Donald Trump, all the while the rest of us are thinking, Well, why in the world didn't you say anything when you actually could have done something about it, when you were in a position of power? And this is the story of the Republican Party now. It's not that they're just complicit and silent and hiding in fear. It's that complicity and silence has enabled this entire racist hijacking by Donald Trump and Stephen Miller.
Let me ask you a real quick question, Kurt. Are they afraid because they're just afraid of Donald Trump tweeting at them? Or are they afraid because they think that the majority of their base, are driven by racism?
Oh, I think it has more to do with the base than it does even with Donald Trump. I mean, we've seen for years, Joy, even going back to the earlier part of the decade with all the Tea Party stuff that we saw, that there is a population within the Republican Party that shows up in primaries, that shows up and moves the agenda so far to the right, that if you cross them, they will try to take you out. Remember when Eric Cantor lost his primary to David Bratt? Right. And that issue, the one that did it for him, it was solely driven by immigration.
And to go to you, Naira, I feel like part of what was bugging Donald Trump, let's show a little bit of Ilhan Omar getting a reception when she got back to Minnesota. Here it is. I mean, her base is majority white. Right? So Republicans are shrinking into a party that, okay, they may be driven primarily by fears of brown immigration, but the whole rest of the country, the majority, is not. And so I wonder what is your calculation on whether or not Trump can actually really win this way and what Democrats should do in response?
It's so funny to hear in light of the Trump rally, several pollsters saying, well, Democrats need to keep talking about health care, when clearly health care and good policy is not what's motivating Republicans to turn out at this point at these rallies for Donald Trump. It's very clearly, he doesn't talk anything about a policy. He's not talking about taxes or health care or small government. He's talking about identity politics, and it's what he's using to motivate his base, when the irony is majority of America is actually very comfortable with the idea of a black president. He was the most popular president we had. What Donald Trump is getting at, though, is the passive racism that exists in our country, right? If you're not wearing a hood or a swastika tattooed on your arm, people walk around thinking, can't possibly be racist. Right. But the second that somebody is competing with you on equal playing field, people start to bring out these passive racist tendencies. That's fundamentally what I grew up around in a Trump voting district. My parents still live there as immigrants. So we see this type of passive racism on a day-to-day. What foreign leaders do with this is entirely different. They've actually always thought that America's competitive advantage was the ability to integrate and to take new ideas from all over the world and make them American. Yeah. Trump is now putting us in the position of becoming less competitive economically, socially, in all sorts of ways, because he's trying to reverse back the clock.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? No president has done that. Like, that's the thing that's different about him, is he's just saying, lean into your anxieties, lean into it. That's what he's doing, which, you know, no president has ever done that particular thing. We had some racist presidents. Naira, Kurt Bardella, Tim Wise, thank you guys very much for coming up. Donald Trump's racism,